are listening to She Has No Limits, the podcast.
Once you're shown, you can't unsee. Time is short, you best believe in yourself. You're a formidable force driving, diving lessons in the deep end.
She Has No Limits is a movement and community for professional women to come together, be inspired and learn how to design the limitless careers that we deserve.
Rocki Howard is on a mission to be a voice for the underrepresented, one of the leading lights in the field of diversity and inclusion. She was acknowledged by Involve as one of the top 100 minority executives 2 years in a row, and last year was also honoured in their top 100 Her Rose Women Role Model list. Rocki is also Chief Diversity Officer for Smart Recruiters, helping its customers disrupt the intersection of diversity and recruitment and create systems that lead to simple, substantive, sincere and sustainable diversity solutions. And she is host of the Voices of Diversity podcast. Rocki believes that if we can change the lives of the underrepresented, we can change the world. She is a proud over 40, Black Christian wife and mom. A huge welcome to She Has No Limits, the podcast, Rocki. Hi, Rocki. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so excited to be here, Amanda. You and I have great conversations when we're not recording, so I can't wait to see what today's episode is going to lead to.
Oh, bless you. You've got me grinning from ear to ear already. So let's start with you. Would you mind telling us a bit about those bits of yourself that you're most proud of?
Yeah, so I will tell you, as I moved into this diversity work in a focus, I had to do some deep reflection on what my pronouns were. And I think, I certainly am a big advocate of the LGBTQ community and a big supporter. And yet I realized I had never holistically embraced the use of my pronouns she, her. And after some deep reflection, I realized that I feel like when I think about what my unique value proposition is and what I'm the most proud of, it comes through the intersectionality of all of that. That's how I show up in the world. And so for me, I'm definitely she, her. I'm a girly girl that likes high heel shoes and a good handbag and some of those kind of things and a lot of makeup and great nails and all of those. And I'm a bit of a tomboy at the other side of it. So, those pieces of my personality. Unfortunately, I love a good curse word. I love a good debate. I'm quite happy to sit around and, pop a drink with the boys and just hang out. And so, but it's those other pieces too. When I think about being Black, there were lots of connotations to that, especially being a darker skinned Black woman with kinky hair that I now really have learned to embrace. There were times in my life where I really tried to minimize and hide that, whether that was, and I think back to the ridiculousness of it all. And look, for the ladies who love to enhance themselves in different ways, look, that it's no shade that way, because if that's how you want to show up, I think that's absolutely awesome. But there was a time in my life where, I was wearing hair weaves and green contacts, not because I just thought they were cool, but because I was trying to assimilate to look more like what popular culture taught me. I am certainly very proud to be a wife of almost 30 years and a mother of 4. They are the best parts of my world, my husband and my kids and what I do. I am a unashamed and unabashed God girl. I'm a Christian, and that is my due north, and it's my faith. I am a product, certainly, of God's grace and mercy. And so when I think about those things, I'm proud to be Gen X. I just turned 52 this year, and I'm not sure what I thought 52 was going to look like and feel like, but I'm really, really proud of that. And so when I think about who I am, all of those things inform how I show up in the world and the perspective that I bring in the world. And while at certain times I was ashamed of all that, we've been taught not to talk about religion and not be a Christian. I had my first daughter before my husband and I were married. And so there was shame and connotation in that. And there was shame in getting older. And there was shame in being this dark-skinned Black woman. And now at this point, I'm a grown woman and I embrace it all. And I'm so proud of all of those dimensions of my diversity.
Gosh, it's incredible. I just feel your energy, Rocki. It's just lovely. It's just so fantastic. Tell us a little bit then about your career journey then so far, and how you came to be where you are today.
It's a great question. And I believe most like a lot of people who are in underrepresented groups, my career wasn't a direct line. And like a lot of people who started their career in recruiting, I didn't go to university and go, oh, I want to go to university and complete it and grow up and be a recruiter. And then I want to go into diversity. That's not how it worked. I just mentioned that we had our first daughter before I was married. And so at that time, both my husband and I were working retail. I'm from Chicago. I worked in a high crime neighborhood. And the fourth time my store got robbed at gunpoint, I was very pregnant or semi-pregnant or mid-pregnancy. I was about 5 months pregnant with my daughter. And of course, you're really stupid when you're in your 20s. Sorry if there's any 20-year-olds, you don't know it yet, but you're really stupid because you haven't had any life experience. And part of being stupid is to think the first 3 times I got robbed at gunpoint, I had this Teflon around me like it was okay. All of a sudden, when I was responsible for another life, I went, oh no, this is not okay. I can't do this. And yet, and still, I'm not the kind of person who gets sit at home. My now husband, my then partner said, just sit down until you have this baby. I'm like, have you met me? I can't sit down and do nothing. So I went into a temp service and said, look, here's the deal. I truly need a temp job. I'm not going to live in the city in 4 months. As you can tell, I'm pregnant, but I would like something to do. And I have no idea what skills I have. I've only worked in retail. I failed out of university. Can you do something with me? And literally they said, well, we like your personality. We've been thinking about having a receptionist. How would you feel about being a receptionist? Okay, fine. And that was the beginning. I couldn't just sit at that front desk. And if you think about temp services back in the late 80s, early 90s, that's when people had to come in and pick up paper checks. And they didn't take tests online. You had to come into the office and take typing, like, people who are listening, there's this prehistoric device called a typewriter. Like, people had to come in and take typing tests, and we did all those kind of things. And then I would get bored, and so I would go ask the recruiters, well, what do you do and how can I help you? And then I figured out there was this whole career where you could talk to people and you could place them in jobs and really help them. And like, I can talk for a living, help people, and make money. Okay, I found my life's mission. This is going to be great. And so I've been very lucky to do what I love for a living. I won't take you through the whole long drawn out story, but moved from every area of recruitment that you can imagine, eventually went into recruiting leadership, always with the lens of diversity and how I could help people who were like me, who were on the outside, who other people just didn't see. How could I see them throughout this process? So I think diversity had always been woven through what I've done. Got some recognition for some of the work that I've done in diversity, started leading large global teams. In fact, in my last role, before I moved into a complete focus on diversity, I had direct and indirect reports of about 200 people in about 4 different countries. Great job. Love them. Love my team. and got the opportunity last year to come to Smart Recruiters, which is a HR tech company, and lead their diversity initiatives. And this was the perfect opportunity for me because I spent half of my time working with our clients to help them improve their diversity hiring outcomes and to work with our head of product to inform what our tech roadmap looks like in terms of diversity. And the other piece of my time is really spent on our internal culture and making sure that that culture is a culture that is rich with equity and inclusion and belonging, where diversity is an expectation. So that's kind of how I got here.
Wow. So I want to ask you about how technology is changing the recruitment landscape, how it's disrupting recruitment. And also you said you wanted to help people who didn't feel seen. So can technology help with that, Rocki? Yeah.
So I want to say a couple of things about this. I think holistic, so I'm going to start holistically and then I'm going to break this down a bit.
Great, thank you.
I think when we think about diversity right now, we're all looking for some magic answer. We're looking for the technology or the checklist or just tell me what I need to do. That's not how we should look at this. I work for a tech company. I work for a leading HR tech company, and I am telling you that tech has to be a tool as part of an overall and overarching strategy on how you drive diversity. And guess what? Diversity is not going to survive in a vacuum of equity, inclusion, and belonging. So you have to look at all of those pieces to be effective and make substantive and sustainable change, which is what I think we're looking for. So when I think about how recruiting has changed and how diversity has changed and where tech comes in and where all those intersections are, I think there's a couple of things. I think you're starting to see people recognize and understand that this isn't just about, oh, let me find the job board where women are on and I'm going to post my job and all of a sudden that's going to solve my problem. That doesn't work. So, and I think you will see even more technology companies look at this in a much more holistic manner. At least I hope so. And so, for example, my company, what we said is we want to come alongside of our clients. Yes, we will give you the technology. We will absolutely show you how the technology supports your goals. But we're also going to be a thought leader to you. We're going to do in-depth research. We're going to create systems that help you. So this year, as a matter of fact, we launched our diversity hiring toolkit, and it is a free toolkit for any company that wants to use it, where we've created standards and pillars that say, you want to have a great diversity hiring program. We think it's based on these 4 key pillars. It's diversity, brand equity, it's fair hiring practices, sourcing strategically, and organizational support, because it's not just about the sourcing. I think the other thing that's really exciting about what I'm seeing when I talk to other diversity leaders is, unlike other business problems where everyone is so competitive and everyone kind of wants to keep the secret in the background, their secret sauce, this is an area where I think you're really seeing, over the last 10, 15 years, we've gotten used to this idea of crowdsourcing. And I think what's happening now is we're really seeing companies come together in a collaborative way that says, look, I've done this, but I need to know what you're doing here. So it's really exciting to see a combination of companies coming together collaboratively to move the diversity needle. And I think that's really exciting when you think about it. And then when I think about a more holistic approach, I think you're thinking about diversity, but we're now starting to have the conversations about how culture impacts and how the wellness impacts of bias and racism and the importance of allyship. So we're starting to see a more holistic approach. And then I think from the tech perspective, you're starting to see some really cool things done. when you think about applicant tracking systems, that system that kind of manages, the recruitment life cycle, I know our organization is being more transparent and making and putting in standards and saying, okay, this is what scorecards look like, and this is how CRMs work, and this is how you can develop your talent community, and here's how you can measure what goes through the process. And so you're seeing applicant tracking systems like ours, like Smart Recruiters, really step up. You see companies like This Way Global, which really lets you connect with talent communities, not just a job board, but to really develop relationships with talent communities. You see tech like the Writing Coach, which helps you not only make sure that your job description is bias free, but it also helps you to make sure that it's not more complex than it needs to be for the audience you're trying to attract, and it doesn't exclude people from other perspectives. You see companies like Claro Analytics who are helping you do market mapping and to be able to say, oh, you want to hire a Black chief diversity officer in the US, let us map the market for you and tell you what markets you can find them in, because now we've proven remote working works. And so it removes the excuse of, oh, I can't find this diverse talent in my little market. Well, you can find it, and technology like Claro can help you identify where you should be searching. I think there's great technology that is coming out in terms of training. If you think about how training has evolved over the last 10, 15 years, it's no longer, oh, you're going to go sit in a corporate classroom for a day and take this training. We now live in a Twitter world where we like things in 140 characters. And so I love companies like Diversity Pop. Diversity Pop is an app that does nudge training and helps with diversity and bias training in a digestible way for our employees. And we know people take their phones everywhere, right? And then I think there's great culture assessment tools like Alomo and Equip, who says, okay, now let's take a look at your culture. Let's tell you where the challenges are and allow us to help monitor and continue to engage your culture so that all of these pieces are starting to fit together. So, for me, that was a really long answer, but I think it's a holistic approach.
I think it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. In terms of the speed of change. What's your view on sort of AI and the bias within AI? I've read around it. I'm not a technologist, but that's one area that interests me as well.
So I think there's a couple of things when you think about AI, right? I think human beings are biased. So I think technology is going to be biased. I think this is a place where representation matters. We hear that representation matters. So when you're building the AI, you need to have the inputs of diverse people to make sure that the AI isn't biased. And I think when we see the challenges of AI, it's often because AI is only good as the inputs and the training that's been put into it. And so when that representation isn't present, does it skew the AI? Yeah, probably. Holistically, though, I think when I see AI used right, it is still, in my opinion, as I'm still researching this as well, ladies, it's probably less biased than the human being that's sitting there, right? And I think when you use AI in combination, remember my kind of theory at the top, tech isn't going to solve the problem. So even if you're using AI, there should be human intervention, right? AI allows us to narrow what we're looking at in terms of the process. So I am a fan of AI, but I don't think any one thing should be used without human intervention.
Wow. I've got a lot to learn.
I do too, Amanda. It's one of the things, like if you look at my Strength Finders profile, I'm a lifetime learner. I'm a learner. So it's one of the reasons I love this. But let me tell you, like this is a moving target and it changes every day. And you really do have to be connected with what's going on. And there is a piece of my work that is about constant research and keeping up with the trends. And, sometimes we go down a path, we think it's right, it looks right. And then you start to see the impact and you go, okay, I need to take a step back and I need to look at that. So trust me, it's part of this journey, and being a good DEIB leader is all about lifetime learning. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to ask Rocki about the human bit, the human side. So, all that insight on the tech. What's your insight on the human side in terms of those organizations, those individuals, those teams, those leaders that are doing it well? Are you seeing common traits, common behaviors for you?
Yeah. It's a good question, right? Because I personally think we don't spend enough time thinking about the human piece of diversity. And part of that is not from any type of malintent. It is to make the kind of change that we need to make within a corporate system. We have to attack this systemically, right? And you have to look at all the places throughout the system that create bias and create racism, and you have to measure this and you have to manage it, and you have to treat it like any other business proposition. I think the challenge with diversity that exists that makes this really different than any other business proposition is I can't think of another business proposition where I also have to get people to change long-held beliefs that are subconscious. I can't think of another business proposition where there's guilt and shame involved, right? I can't think of another business proposition where all my life I've been taught not to talk about race, religion, politics, sexual orientation at work. And now all of a sudden you expect me to have a language for this. And so when you think about diversity from my point of view, it's a heart and mind issue. We have to equally address both. And I think what's happening is we're right now, and rightfully so, tackling the systemic pieces of diversity. And from my point of view, we don't spend enough time on the human being piece. And quite frankly, that's one of the reasons why I started my podcast, is because I recognize that we need to never lose sight of the fact that the reason we should be doing this work is simply because it's the right thing to do, and it's because it's about doing right by people. My goal is to work myself out of a job. I would love that the world not need a chief diversity officer.
Mm. Tell us a bit more about the podcast, Rocki. You've had how many guests now?
Yeah, so episode 19 just dropped yesterday. So I'm really, really excited. Thank you so much. And so the goal of the podcast is to humanize diversity, one conversation, one story, one action at a time. I believe that storytelling is a powerful tool in an advocate's toolbox. And so I think when I started the podcast, there were really two things that I had the intentions of. One is to give people who identify as being underrepresented a voice and a place and a platform to tell their stories and to tell their experiences of what it feels like to work in corporate America. And that was a lesson learned from me. In 2020, I led some courageous conversations on the back of the murder of George Floyd. And I found colleagues who had known me for years as I was talking about an experience that I had had a week before that, where my husband was pulled over in his own neighborhood for what we in the Black community call driving while Black. So literally, he's going from one subdivision to the next one. You're talking a 1/4-mile radius, and was pulled over because they weren't sure that he belonged in the car that he was driving in. He didn't look like he belonged in the neighborhood he was in. And so we made up this excuse, oh, your taillight is out, so we could pull him over and ask him a ton of questions. Okay. And what I realized as I was telling that story and talking about my dark-skinned, dreadlock, hoodie-wearing son, and how I am terrified when he goes out into the world because I know how the world views him. The truth is he's a little yuppie kid from suburbia. That's not how the world sees him. And so I was having these conversations about these experiences, and people that I had worked with for years that could tell you my husband's name and my son's name, et cetera, were like, we didn't know you experienced those things. And I'm like, just because you get to a certain position within corporate America or a certain social economic status, it doesn't suddenly negate my Black card, and people all of a sudden are like, oh, well, it's Rocki. We're not going to be racist around Rocki, right? And I realized that it's almost a protection measure that people go, oh, well, that doesn't happen in my world, or it doesn't happen to people I know, and that these stories needed to be told. So that was really one of the catalysts. And I think the other catalyst was really, imagine having a conversation with someone who doesn't understand what it's like to be underrepresented, and to be able to say, you know what, do you have 30 minutes? Let me have you listen to something. And when you hear the stories, it's not just about the experience, it's about the energy and the pain you can hear in certain people's voices that I think I've just seen tremendous change that can happen through those stories.
Wonderful. And this is a tough question to ask because we're all about inclusion. Are there any particular guests that you've had on whose stories have affected you more? Any that stand out?
This is a tough question because I think, to your point, every time I do one of these episodes, I take something away from it, and it sends a little bit of heartprint on me. So, you know, when you think about your audience, you think about Stacey Gordon talking about how women leaned in to support her launch. I think about Akbar being a feminist and talking about the fact that, you know, allies need to speak the same language and be willing to make sacrifices, or the lessons we learned from like Marcus Sawyer talking about his 3 C's of diversity, connection, careers, and community. And then there's the people who get to your heart. Branda's talking about we just want to be seen. Dorian talking about mental health aspects. Bob talking about the power of allyship. And then there's the inspirational pieces you have. You've got Stacey and Sadna, who were both single moms and young moms, and telling their story of what that like. And then you have John Jackson and Dwayne Bennett talking about redemption from being in prison to being part of the community. But there are a couple of moments that I think these quotes will never go away. Dr. Dave Caudell, who is on the autism spectrum, saying it was easier for him to get a PhD in physics than it was for him to learn how to have a conversation with a stranger. Or Kaveh Balambo, who said, walking through corporate America as a Black woman is like walking on glass. Those are statements that will never leave my heart.
Yeah. Wow.
Gosh.
So I wanted to ask you about George Floyd. It had a profound impact here in the UK and a really important moment for us. Certainly as a coaching business, we had companies coming to us and saying, help us to start a brave conversation in the round about what we might be doing as a result of our inherent bias. So we have seen progress. We have seen important conversations started, people coming together, being vulnerable, and putting initiatives in place to make their workplaces more inclusive so that everybody there, especially the Black community, feel safe, feel like they belong. I mean, I've got no context for some of the stuff you're talking about, Rocki. It just blows my mind. You know, we don't live in a society where you're allowed to own a gun very easily. And so the thought of you as a, increasingly fond person in my life, the fact that you've been held up at gunpoint several times in your life, it's really hard for me as a Brit to wrap my head around that. So is it too soon for there to be a positive ripple effect as a result of George Floyd? And of course, recognising that, I think his death was the enough is enough moment.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that question because I think it's really interesting. When George Floyd was originally murdered. And then there were all of this, to your point, this created, it wasn't just a moment, it became a movement. And I'll be honest, my initial reaction as a Black woman was I was angry because at the time it felt like a social media trend, right? It felt like people were stuck at home because of COVID and they were going to jump on this bandwagon for a moment in time, when from where I sit, this has been happening in my community for over 400 years. This was just another modern lynching in the Black community. And if you think about it, during that same time, you had Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. Like, it wasn't just that George Floyd happened and it was this unique situation. And so I was originally very angry by all the hubbub until I realized that it was not going to be a moment. It has actually become a movement. And so what I think is that we've elevated the conversation. What I think is society is no longer going to tolerate what it tolerated before. I think we've amplified voices. I think what you're going to see is companies are going to be held accountable. So I'm a big fan of Just Capital, and Just Capital had this survey, and I don't have the number in front of me, but it was something like 85% of Americans at that point said 2020 was that moment in time where corporations needed to then take a step back and not be so focused on capitalism, but to really look at how they take care of their people, their workers, their community at large. And so I think that's the shift that we're seeing. Now, with that having been said, what I am very conflicted and concerned about is the performative nature of what some organizations are doing. You know, everyone and their, grandmother hired a CDO last year, right? Like, if you, literally, I think I was just discussing this with someone. If you go on and look at the job postings, there's 7,000 postings for diversity professionals, right? And so there's some challenges with that, because I think people believe, and maybe it's well-intentioned, if I hire this person, they're going to solve my whole problem. Some people believe, it's performative, I can't not hire it because all of my peers are hiring it. So I think the real proof in the pudding. And for me, quite frankly, you had another one of those moments with the insurrection in the U.S. this year, where you can see side by side the very different ways that different communities are treated in the U.S. And we can't ignore that. So to answer your question, do I think we're absolutely making progress? Do I think we'll be able to go back to where we were? No, I don't. Is it too soon to be able to understand if this is sustainable? I think that's a question I'd love to answer 12 to 18 months from now.
Rocki, this second podcast series is all about allies, support networks and communities. Tell us a little bit about who your allies are and your support networks and your communities that you belong to. Tell us more.
Yeah, so my strongest community is certainly my family. I've been married almost 30 years and I have 4 children, and they are my biggest supporters, my biggest allies, and my biggest community, right? And I am really blessed to have friends and mentors and sponsors who tell me the truth, right? And who are shoulders for me, because this work is really, really hard work, because it's heart and soul work. And as a matter of fact, me being in this job was a result of a sponsor. So someone who I had worked for, who has continued to be an ally, an advocate for me, that said, this is the perfect job for you. You have to go and look at this. And so, that's another kind of key in terms of the importance of allyship. Allies are able and sponsors are able. And I think we need to understand the difference between mentors and allies and sponsors. They all play a different role. But in this particular case, that sponsor was able to put me at the table for the right role. So I think those are all really important. One of the things that I really love, and I mentioned earlier, is being in this diversity community. There are so many individuals who understand how hard this work is, and they have just embraced me openly. So you've got, people like Jennifer Brown, who, wrote the book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader, and Jackie Clayton and Torrin Ellis and Stacey Gordon and Arthur Woods. And all of these people are doing this diversity work, and they, we stand together, right? And we help each other out. And I think that that's so important. And I think the recruiting community that I have been a part of for such a long time, but, my role has kind of been in the background, but they've accepted me to the forefront, and I really appreciate it. I mean, there's been people in the industry for years, like, a Jerry Crispin or a William Tincup or Lars, that have just said, hey, Rocki, we'll support you, and we support the work that you're doing. And then certainly I think for me, my Smart Recruiters family, having a CEO that has prioritized that and given me the room to be able to be that voice, and to have executive leaders and colleagues who have my back and want to learn and want to help me when things get tough. Like, those are the communities that I sit in that allow me to be able to get up and do this every day.
Rocki, in your intro, we shared a wonderful belief statement. You say, if we change the lives of the underrepresented, we change the world. And when I read that, I thought about some of Martin Luther King's quotes. It's very similar language, really powerful, really, I wanted to ask you about this. How can we help change the lives of the underrepresented? If we think about our workplaces, on whom is the change incumbent? Let's start there.
Yeah, so first of all, I believe that change is incumbent upon all of us. So no chief diversity officer, no CEO by themselves in a vacuum can own this change. They can drive it, they can champion it. But I think it's extremely important for every person in the organization to understand what their role is in terms of embracing diversity. And it's not just about diversity, it's in terms of equity, inclusion, and belonging. So you can bring me to the table, but if people don't accept me, if people don't give me access, if people don't make me feel like I belong, then it doesn't do any good. And so, I find one of the challenges is above the glass ceiling, people create this idea of what diversity looks like. And it absolutely, I think, should start there, but they don't realize what happens below the glass ceiling, and that's where it gets stuck. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to create a roadmap that says, in our organization, here's my role, but here's your role. And this is what I need you to do. And these are the behaviors that I need you to demonstrate. And this is how I need you to treat colleagues. And again, you would hope that you wouldn't have to do that, but I think that you do. And it's interesting, on this week's podcast, I have a great quote. One of the questions we always ask our guests is, if there is one thing you could tell allies to do to make a difference, just one thing, what would it be? And this week, Bob Athwal, who is Senior Talent Manager over at Skyscanner, and he heads up race equity and a few other functions, but he said, truly understand the lived experience for some of us and why that's important for us to become anti-racist and understand what that term means and what we're asking for. And I think that that's an important dynamic. And then I think there was another quote from Sadhna, who is a international managing director for Cameo. And she said, I think if you could hire someone different than you, who scares you, makes you nervous, hire that person, because that person is a person that's going to make your company better. And I think we're sometimes afraid to hire people that are different than us. It does scare us, but it'll make our company better. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us. And I do think, going back to the principle of what I said, I'll walk you through that from my life perspective, and I'll do it in a very short way. If you think about just the things that I've shared here today, I dropped out of school. I was in a social economic status that I was trying to work 3 jobs and go to school full time. That doesn't work. So I failed out of school. I was knocked up. So I could have been a single mom. I wasn't. Thank you, Raymond, wherever you are, my loving husband. But you could see those things that already put me behind the curve, right? So I'm Black, I'm a female, I don't have the same education, I don't have the same access. I now have some barriers in terms of potentially how I show up in the world. And because people invested in me, because people saw something in me, because there were allies and sponsors on the way who were willing to look past maybe a degree requirement or this or that and see what I could actually bring to the table and deliver. As a God girl, I have to say, because of God's grace and mercy, I am here. But that could have very easily been a different story. That could have been I'm on public assistance. That could have been me in jail. All the statistics say that I could have been in a completely different situation. But now look at how I can contribute to the world and how I can help facilitate change because someone did that to me. And if we took every underrepresented group and lifted them up and gave them a seat at the table, what kind of world would we live in? I'm thinking it'd be a pretty good world.
In our last podcast episode, we had a 22-year-old who started a really successful community called Girls in Marketing, and it's already within 18 months got tens of thousands of members. And we were just agog, weren't we, Catherine, at what she had accomplished already at that age. So I'm going to compare you in the age sense. So for me, you say you're a proud over 40, proud over 50. Your kids have grown up. This is your time, Rocki. You are killing it, aren't you? I mean, in so many ways, your career is going to a whole new level now in your 50s.
It's exciting. It's really exciting. And it's funny that you say that because I walked away from a very successful career in recruiting to take this journey into diversity. And when I had that conversation with my core family, my community, and we were talking about this, it felt like a legacy decision. And my oldest daughter looked at me and she's like, Mom, you have made so many decisions that are about what we need and what your teams need and what your organization needs. We're giving you permission to make the decision about what you need and what you're willing to go do. And I love getting up every day. It's good stuff.
I think our work is done. I think that is the perfect place to end this conversation. Rocki, thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to use this podcast to mention, give a shout out, pay gratitude to anybody?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you and Catherine for having me and for trusting me with your audience and for being such bold, brilliant, and badass allies of women. It's so important that we do that. And I appreciate that you believe that she has no limits. And I think if we all believe that she has no limits, again, what would the world accomplish? And I am way too afraid to give any names with the exception of Raymond Howard, who I love and adore, and thank you, hubby. I wouldn't be here without you. But what I would say is to all those people who I depend on, you know who you are. I appreciate you. Thank you for being ride or die with me. And I would just say, continue to remember that you can change the world one story, one conversation, one action at a time. And please don't forget those voices of diversity.
Amen, sister.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. What did you think, Amanda? That was some energy in the room with us this afternoon.
Man, I love that woman. She's a force of nature. And of course, one of the things that our listeners don't know is just how stunning she is. Like, I think visually, aesthetically, she's just so powerful as well. her fingernails, for example. She just looks so classy.
She certainly does. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation with loads and loads of takeaways for me. I think early on, that insight that for a lot of these very difficult conversations that we're having, we just don't have the vocabulary, and how challenging that is, and how that therefore means that it's quite a fearful conversation to have for many of us. So there was a big insight there for me as she was talking, in terms of how do we create that vocabulary? How do we get more comfortable with having the difficult conversations?
Mm-hmm. I love the fact that it was her exploration of her pronouns that led her to really think about her identity and the intersectionality of all of the different parts of who she is and how she shows up in the world.
Mm-hmm. And also, you know, as we were saying towards the end, this is her time, this is her moment, this is her opportunity for her legacy, and the generosity with it she is doing it in collaboration and partnership with others. You know, just as she was sharing with us, all those many people that she's connecting with and leading change and driving, one hopes, a much better society that we all can live in.
Yeah, not just individuals, but, you know, she name dropped so many different organisations in HRtech, you know, a hugely exciting and innovative industry. There's so much change going on in HR and in recruitment. Again, her generosity of mentioning all of the organisations who are disrupting and innovating and you know, we talk about the war on talent. It's a massively competitive industry. It always has been. And yet what Rocki's saying is, you know, if we're gonna really nail this systemically, we have to collaborate, we have to share best practice. Just one final thing. I love the fact that she talks about diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging as a heart and mind issue, and how that makes it really hard. You know, it is emotionally draining. You know, like you said, there's a lot of soul searching, there's a lot to learn, you know, whether that's the language we're using, the behavioural change, the unpacking the unconscious bias. It is really courageous work. And it's not for the faint-hearted, it's for the likes of Rocki to really excel in this space.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rocki, and all the people that you're working with. It's fantastic work.
That's it for this episode. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed. Please send us your feedback. And if you'd like to have a sneaky peek as to who's coming up, then go to shehasnolimits.com and check out our podcast page.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon. Take care. All the best.